There is nothing I enjoy more than putting something on and being completely and totally taken aback by it. Just watching a movie and around halfway through staring at the screen and saying, what the hell is this? More often than not, it leads to a memorable, if not always enjoyable, experience. And today, like I've done a few times before, I'm checking out 10 really weird and insane horror, or I guess horror adjacent films, and seeing if I can get through them while holding on to my sanity. Such as it is. Number 10. So I figured why not start things off really weird, and I mean really weird, with 2022's All Jacked Up and Full of Worms. We meet Roscoe, a young man with a hippie girlfriend who has brought another man into their house and is teaching her new age sex stuff. But there's also Benny, who's not all there, and you can tell this because he has some sort of baby doll that he treats as real. Oh, and it's a sex doll. Youth edition. Ew. To be clear though, Benny doesn't want it for sex. He wants to make it a real baby. He also has an encounter with a prostitute who introduces him to a hot new drug, worms. And shortly after, he meets up with Roscoe. And things get more bizarre when the prostitute turns out to be pregnant. And Roscoe's lady is cheating on him. And oh yeah, you either eat or snort the worms, which puts you into a state of bliss. And whoops, Sam ODs. I mean, I told you this was weird. I said that very plainly at the beginning here. But I realize now that I was underselling it. Because there's bits where Roscoe is puking his guts out in an alleyway, and the prostitute appears in full fishing garb to reel in a worm. And honestly, that's just the tip of the iceberg here. It just gets stranger and grosser as it goes on. And this one was both written and directed by a guy named Alex Phillips. And this was his debut film, although he had made a handful of shorts beforehand. It was originally meant to be a play and was intended to represent a quest for normalcy and attaining a regular life, but being too broken to be able to get to it. And trust me when I say that this is pretty damn gross and dark. It's like Frank Henenlotter remade Requiem for a Dream, although he kind of already did that with Brain Damage, even though that movie came first. This is definitely not for everyone, but it is extremely insane. And like most movies that are made with a more abstract and artistic message in mind, you may or may not get something out of this. I enjoyed it, even if I don't think it really worked that well, and it does feel a little bit unfocused, and it's maybe trying a bit too hard for the gross out stuff, but it's a trip. Number 9. Now, here's one that you know will be insane just based on the title, and it's 2020's The Pizzagate Massacre. And with a name like that, you're expecting some weird stuff. But this isn't what you think. It starts with a man describing the conspiracy theories and that there was a string of murders and that there was a cult involved. And then bounces back a day to Waco, Texas. There's a news station with a new intern starting, with the anchor reporting on a sort of online story about a sex ring run out of a pizza parlor and lizard people and the very hyperbolic reporting of it. Karen meets up with a slightly unhinged fellow named Duncan, and he's a member of a militia. She goes there to try and enlist some help in order to go to try to investigate the reports of the conspiracy. Duncan agrees to help her out, although he doesn't really believe there's anything happening in the pizza places, even if he does believe in lizard people. Along the way, they're forced to talk to each other and not only confront their own assumptions about each other, but also some dark encounters. After they force a violent standoff and things go south, it seems for a bit that it's swinging to a more dramatic realm, before truly delving into the world of the insane. And yeah, this is on here because with a title that bold and a poster that looks like this, you think that you're going to be handed some kind of crazed exploitation flick, and instead, it serves up a strange and dark social satire instead. This isn't cashing in on the actual tragedy that happened. and is a fictional what-if kind of a story. And it's way more serious than you'd expect, even if guys are randomly whipping penises out at one point. The writer and director is John Valley, and he's a protege of Robert Rodriguez, and can even be seen acting in some of his stuff. And the budget here was less than $100K, and looks to be significantly higher, showing that his time with Rodriguez was well spent. And if you're one of those that doesn't like messages in your movie or discussion about our current political situations, then you're going to want to stay away from this one, because that's basically what the whole thing is. But it's likely a message that needs to be seen. Number 8. This is another one that should let you know how odd it's going to be just based on the title, and it's 2019's Butt Boy. It starts with a corporate office rally that gives me hardcore flashbacks, and we meet Chip, who is likely all of us right now. His home life is equally unhappy, and after a routine checkup of his back door area, something weird starts to happen. And when I say weird, I hope you're ready for this. Things start to disappear around him. First dogs, but then people. Despondent and likely guilty, Chip tries to kill himself, and then it jumps 9 years. And we have Officer Fox, and he's struggling with alcoholism. And it turns out that his sponsor is Chip. They talk about their issues, and something in Chip is triggered as he goes home that night, and okay, here's where the insanity comes back into play, because he shoves a sorry playing piece up his butt. And let me tell you, I've played many a game of sorry in my life, and that is not the way to get out of home base. You need a 1 or 2. He falls off the wagon pretty hard, and things around him once again start to disappear, and it soon becomes apparent that those things are vanishing up his butt. Fox starts to investigate missing things, including a small child, and the trail seems to lead back to Chip, and he suspects something. After a brief period of following him around, he quickly figures out that the objects go up his butt and disappear, his body apparently digesting them or storing them, and says that he's getting more powerful the more objects that he puts up there. So yeah, pretty strange stuff. And Chip is played by Tyler Cornack, who also directed and co-wrote the film. The other writer is Ryan Koch, and the two, plus a number of the players, all started off with a TV series called Tiny Cinema. There was a number of very short segments, and this movie is a spin-off of one of them. After this, they actually did a theatrical version of Tiny Cinema as well, and this one was done on a very small budget and ended up being a festival darling and got some rave reviews. Despite the lurid suggestions of the title, it's a very reserved film, and if you're expecting a number of gross-out gags and trauma-style butt shenanigans, you're not gonna get them. Instead, you get this rather pleasant character piece, and I'm not sure how to say this because it may seem wrong to say, but this is a very good movie. Like, sure, it kind of runs out of steam for a while and is probably too long, but damn did I enjoy this. And it is odd that this is now the second film in a row that seems to be a crazed exploitation thing, and then switches things up by being better made and well put together than expected. It's still weird as hell, though. Number 7. So this next one is on here for a couple of reasons, but there's one main one, and it's 2020's Catskill Cannibals, and this is how it starts. Huguenot horror. But like, notice the spelling? Catskill? It starts in 2019, and a guy who looks like an extra from On the Waterfront goes to see a punk band. And how's this for weird? The singer has a gimp mask, and I guess this guy, playing I think tambourine, didn't want to be in the movie, so they had to hide his face. Everything is done in ADR, and the dubbing is not great, so there's times that it looks like an old kung fu movie. Guy finds out that he's inherited a castle, but it has to be occupied, and he heads out with some others to check it out. They're greeted by this guy in monk's robes carrying candles, and they enter what looks to be a room in an amateur haunted house made up to look like a medieval room, complete with paintings that I think are meant to look ancient, but are, not. Then this happens.
Cannibalism! Fun? Cannibalism! Cannibalism! Cannibalism!
And then he tells Brian about his ancestors, and it flashes back to the 1600s, and a group of Huguenots are lost in the winter. And then it happens. The whole reason why I put this on this list. This kid sees some natives, and this is his reaction.
Savage! There's a savage!
What, boy?
There's a savage!
What? Speak up!
There's a savage!
This kid is totally committed to this line, and I love him for it. This is possibly the most perfect line reading that has ever been put on film, and he should be lauded.
There's a savage!
What? Speak up!
There's a savage!
Not only does it seem like none of these people are professional actors, but it's very clear that there's no script, and they're just sort of given a basic instruction. But they kill and eat a native, trying as hard as they can to not laugh. They form a town and become secret cannibals, and in the next scene you kind of figure out what's going on here. I'd be willing to bet that someone knew some people going to a whole Revolutionary War enactment weekend thing and just took some cameras and a loose outline of things they wanted to happen and then just shot. Like, some people play multiple characters, and they even try to explain that by saying that their inbreeding make them all look alike, and they sentence them to execution.
Rape! Murder!
It's just a shot away. And magically, when they're set on fire, they're all able to hold incredibly still. But then, even funnier, when they burn, instead of having, I guess, skeletons or whatever, they have what looks to be sticks. Also, I don't know why, but whenever they're eating people, they just seem to say cannibal, cannibal over and over. But this is the only feature from Michael X. Rose, with the writer being credited as Pseudolus Huxley, a real name, I'm sure. And at one point, the ancient castle that they're staying in turns into a modern house, and a scene that features a girl, and only one girl, running around by herself. And she even goes into a backyard that very clearly shows her not in that castle anyway. But yeah, this is silly and amateur and seemingly pieced together from a series of random shoots trying to string together a story. Like, they just switch from the whole cannibal thing to exorcism stuff with 15 minutes left, and it's pretty terrible stuff, but I laughed like a lot. So I'd actually say that it's worth watching for the sheer nuttiness of it all. Like, an actor is acting over the top, and the others start to laugh at him, and they just left it in the movie. Number 6. It's getting stranger now as we go to 1997's The Necro Files, which begins the classic way, with a woman taking a long shower with no shower curtain, while someone peeps in on her, and that man could possibly be Buckethead. Oh, and also has a swastika on his forehead. He kills the woman, and then there's a couple of cops, and it appears as if the guy also killed one of their sisters, and is a serial killer who targets women. There's then a rather lengthy gore scene as the killer cuts up the body right before the police arrive and arrest him, but one cop gets too hot under the collar and just shoots him. And I don't know if this was an accident, but there appears to be a fart sound effect as his body drops. Later, a bunch of Satanists show up in broad daylight to a cemetery and pull out a crying baby from a bag, and trust me, it is very clearly an actual baby and not just an unmoving baby doll. They kill it and pee on the grave of the killer with a close-up of a very obvious fake penis, and his zombie form erupts from the ground to kill them all. Meanwhile, the angry cop is even angrier and having hilarious outbursts.
He's a scumbag! They're all a bunch of f***ing scumbags! They don't deserve to f***ing live! They should just do the world a favor, man! I should blow their f***ing brains out!
Seems like a couple of the Satanists survived and are now trying to figure out how to stop their own creation, but first, lunch.
What the hell is this, man? I forgot my cinnamon Crispitos.
Of course, Zombie Logan goes back to his evil ways, now with like a 2-foot-long zombie penis. And oh, I would like to point out that one of the Satanists is wearing a Smashing Pumpkins t-shirt, like most Satanists back in the day would do. And okay, now here's where things start to get really wacky, because this is low-budget trash, but it's not too insane so far. But when those Satanists decide to call up another demon to fight Zombie Logan, it takes the form of the baby they sacrificed and floats around and attacks. It is genuinely hilarious. What else is nuts? This gang member dressed up to look like an old school Vato who looks like he's on his school's rowing team. And this one is by Matt Jasel. Jasel. And he's done a number of low budget fare like Legion of the Night and American Driller Killer. But this is probably what he's the most known for. It would actually be followed up by 2 sequels. One in 2003 called The Necrophiles 2, Lust Never Dies, and the third in 2017 called Necrophiles 3000. And oh yeah, if for some reason you're still questioning that this film belongs on this list, a subplot in this one involves Logan's love affair with an inflatable sex doll. Number 5. Here's a different kind of insane, because now we're going to 1995 and watching Baby Ghost. And oh boy, this one is from Donald G. Jackson and Scott Shaw, so strap in. And I guess I'll talk about them more in a minute if you're not familiar. Joe Estevez is in this, which is just not really ever a good sign, and he's a family portrait photographer who seems to be having some troubles. A little girl he's shooting goes off on her own, and she finds some old barrel that's locked up and of course decides to open it up. But she's also stalked by a mustache-bearing security guard. The box begins to shake, and our hero forgets that he never read his horoscope, so he makes sure to toss all of the parts of the paper, as people do all the time. He's obsessed with calling this a psychic hotline, and by some sort of coincidence, I guess she works in the same building that he does, but Conrad Brooks of Plan 9 from Outer Space fame is there too. And I should point out that this is almost a full half hour into the movie, and literally nothing has happened. It's been 30 freaking minutes of Winslow here, trying to go home. That's the movie. Oh, but then something does happen as we get a view of the baby ghost. It's a baby that's a ghost. And you know, between this movie and the last one, I think Supernatural Bambinos is some sort of a theme. I didn't plan on that, but there you go. Oh, there's also some robbers planning on breaking into the building, like second-rate wet bandits or something, while Baby Ghost freaks everyone out. And I've covered a bunch of Donald Jackson films before, and they're usually like some sort of crazy fever dream, with Roller Gator being my nightmare of pain. This movie reminds me of that one very much. It's a half-hearted attempt at a family film, put out in the same year as the big-budget Casper film, so I suppose it can be categorized as a mockbuster. You'll also notice that Baby Ghost doesn't much look like an actual baby, and instead looks like a creature of a kind, and that's because it totally is. Seems like it's the same prop that Jackson used for another family film attempt called The Little Lost Sea Serpent. But since everyone says it looks like a baby, then I guess we just have to believe them. Number 4. Okay, earlier on we had Butt Boy, and I guess if the theme isn't going to be dead babies, it's going to be butts, because this is 1998's Butt Crack. As soon as you see that Troma logo, I'm sure you're braced for silly and strange, and you're gonna get it as we meet Brian and his slobby roommate, Wade. So, Wade has this problem where every time he bends down, he exposes his butt crack, which bugs everyone and makes Brian's girlfriend leave. Just the sight of his slightly exposed crack is enough to ruin everyone's love lives, so they have to try to distract him to get him out of the house. But things keep escalating. When he just won't take a hint, Brian has hit his breaking point and accidentally, but maybe not accidentally, electrocutes and kills Wade. They pass it off as an accident, and at his funeral, the late great Mojo Nixon serves as the preacher. And you know, Mojo, I loved you. I loved you to death. But you were a little wrong about Michael J. Fox having no Elvis in him. Unfortunately, Brian can't fool Wade's sister, who somehow knows the truth and is also versed in black magic. And even after his death, all they can talk about is this guy's butt crack. So I'm actually thinking that the problem is theirs. Thanks to a spell from his sis, Wade emerges from the ground, crack still exposed, and they try to return him to his burial spot before he can get his revenge. And this is from Jim Larson, a man who did several other micro-budget features before this, but butt crack seems to be the work of his that got the most attention. This also appears to be his final film work, although he does still do stuff on YouTube, but not really in the horror realm. It was shot on a really low budget and hit the shelves right around the time that there was a sort of a trauma resurgence, so it got a good amount of video store circulation, and it's pretty damn fun. And yeah, the level of sheer wackiness simply ramps up when it's revealed that gazing at Wade's zombie crack will also transform you into a zombie, so it certainly escalates into insanity. And yeah, you know it's good because it's got Mojo Nixon, and if your film ain't got Mojo Nixon, then your film could use some fixin'. Number 3. Alright, since we're on the subject of weird trauma flicks, I guess then we'll just discuss this one, and it's 2010's Mad Cow. It's set in South Africa and begins with a woman being attacked by a weird man with cow horns. So I guess he's a bull, and she's kind enough to recycle her gun. It then flashes back a few days, and we see that something is already on the loose, killing chefs, but then we meet Charlize, and one night she's attacked by a man, but he's killed by this giant mutant cow with a chainsaw. And I would like to say that that's a sentence that I never thought I'd write, but after so many years of doing this, it actually feels pretty normal. This definitely leans more into the comedy aspects, like Charlize goes to take a shower and she has a tattoo that says, "Hi, I'm Charlize," and then when we can see her breasts but not her head, it suddenly says, "Hi, I'm Charlize's body double." The local policeman teams up with a bushman to try to find out who or what is killing people, and it turns out that it's the work of a mad scientist who created a half-man, half-cow creature as an experiment, and of course, it got loose. Which makes me wonder, which mad scientist experiments haven't gotten loose? There's all these movies with them getting loose, so unless their ratio of things not getting loose to things getting loose is really low, then there's tons of crazy stuff out there still in labs or something. Turns out the doc was planning on making what he considered to be the perfect human, but oops, I guess he forgot to get a head for it, and sends his very attractive but not too bright assistant to fetch one. Instead of getting a human head, she messes up and brings back a cow one, which, let's face it, that's a mistake we've all made at some point. But the doc sees this and just says, whatever, let's roll with it. So this one doesn't just take place in South Africa, but it was also filmed there, in Johannesburg, for around 50 grand. It was both written and co-directed by Michael Wright, who's done some other horror films, but mostly in the UK, including The Undertake and Bunny Slope, but got his start by directing a series of shorts for Nickelodeon. It seems he met with another director named Michael Ricks from South Africa when he was at Cannes, and they were joking around about making a horror film about a killer cow man. Struck up a deal to film it together, premiering at Cannes, again just 1 year later. It's also pretty fun and it has its moments, even if I feel like it may go on for a little too long, but it's probably worth your time if you like silly camp. Number 2. I was actually hesitant about putting this next one on here because it's a little more well-known and the movie itself isn't that insane, but the story behind it is, and it's Tammy and the TRex. I should point out, though, that we first meet our heroine, Carmen Ibanez, and it says her character's name is Tanny, not Tammy. Her boyfriend is just too fast, too furious, and imagine I said that out loud with the number 2s instead of the word 2s, and they meet up with a friend, and he calls her Tammy. So I don't know what they're going with the name. Michael wants to date Tammy, but she's afraid that her jealous ex will find out, and he did. And he's part of a gang that includes Roach as a member, and they fight, but Billy pulls that most villainous of moves, the testy tug. Buck Flower pops in, but then it gets weird when Bernie Lomax shows up, and he's working with one of the Children of the Corn to develop this massive robotic dinosaur. And this thing is great, this big old robo-dino. That night, Michael goes to meet up with Tammy at her house, but Billy's there too, and they end up knocking him out and, okay, hear me out, taking him to a wild animal park that has lions roaming around and dump him there. He ends up getting mauled by one of them and rushed to the hospital, where Doc Walkenstein steals his body and takes him back to the lab, where they remove his brain in very gory fashion. And we'll talk about that in a second. He removes his brain, and I love that it's not connected to anything. Like, it's not connected to a spinal column or anything at all. And then they just put the brain into the Robo-Rex. But then Michael's mind wakes up in the dino body and starts chomping. And here's what's up. You may have seen this movie before, since it used to run on cable quite a bit, but you'll likely not remember some of this gruesome stuff. And this was directed by Stuart Raffle, and he's pretty infamous considering that he directed the awesome Ice Pirates and the more low-key Philadelphia Experiment, and a notorious masterpiece of product placement, Mac and Me. Oh yeah, one more thing. If you watch this and you're like, hey, this character of Byron is basically just Hollywood Melrose, well, that's likely because Raffle also directed Mannequin 2 on the Move, which featured that character. And it looks like this film was a product of circumstance. Raffle knew a guy that ended up with access to a full-sized T-Rex prop, but would only have it for around 2 weeks. Without a script, they whipped up a concept and started putting everything together as quickly as possible and constantly changed things as they were shooting. But here's where it gets interesting and a little insane, and why I put this on here, outside of the fact that it's about a guy whose brain gets put into a robot T-Rex. But distributors saw this gory horror comedy and said, oh hey, we can market this to a bigger audience, and they cut out all of the violence to make it a PG-13 film and marketed it more as a silly flick for all ages. Other countries released the whole thing though, so certain markets got the whole bloody mess, and after a very long time, about 25 years after its release, it would get new life as Tammy and the T-Rex: The Gore Cut. And this film is a masterpiece of ridiculousness. Just for the shots of the T-Rex arms alone, it's worth watching. And if you're like me, you've seen this movie quite a few times. And it's just this weird and insane experience to suddenly see it again with large amounts of violence thrown in there. Number 1. The final film of our roster is probably the weirdest one here, and it's 1989's Dr. Kagari. And I hope you're ready for this, but trust me, you're not ready for this. To set the mood, this is how it starts. We then meet bored housewife Mrs. Van Houten, and I say house although she doesn't have any walls and instead lives in this garden-like place, and discovers that she's developing these festering boils. Oh, and she's played by Laura Albert, and you may not recognize her as an actress, but she's an incredibly in-demand stunt woman who began with doing stunt work all the way back on silk stockings and is still working regularly today. She's plagued by a series of visions, including a sexual encounter with a baby masked man and a talking TV, and she only speaks in riddles.
The universe is vast. I am a time bomb. I am life on Venus. Life as we know it. Over.
Her husband doesn't approve of her newfound wantonness and calls Dr. Kagari at the nearby asylum where Van Houten had a previous stay. The doc recommends it should be put back into her care, and we also meet a couple of the other doctors on hand there that think that Kagari's methods are out of bounds. It's revealed that Kagari is the granddaughter of another Kagari who started the Institute, a reference to the classic silent film that this is based on. And then we meet Glenn, and if this guy's face looks familiar, it's because you're used to seeing it in zombie makeup saying, "Send more paramedics." Here he plays a crazed sex-raving cannibal who's also put under the doc's care, and they put Van Houten in the asylum.
My husband had an erection once. Silly, really.
which causes her to have a bit of a breakdown where a giant flesh wall appears in the door and transforms into a giant mouth and tongue that she proceeds to make out with. I mean, I told you this was weird. And then she goes back into the hospital. Well, and that's when things get really insane. So, what is all this? Well, it's the only mainstream feature film for Steven Sedayan, otherwise known as Rince Dream. And most of his films were X-rated, but were mostly as strange as this one is. He did the nutso 1982 adult feature Cafe Flesh, which feels quite a bit like this movie, just with more boning. He co-wrote the script with Jerry Stahl, and if that name isn't familiar, then you should check out the book Permanent Midnight, or the movie made about it with Ben Stiller, because it's his life story. I actually got to go see this one as a special screening with Stahl and Sedayan along with Laura Albert, and during it they said that this was never meant to be a sequel to The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. They had been working on and developing this idea, and they pitched it to a producer who said he liked the idea and it had landed with the rights to the classic silent film and wanted to know if they could somehow tie it in. And they said, sure, why not? If it'll mean that they can get their movie made. So they wrote in a couple of references and comments to that one and changed some names to make it fit. It's a movie that's hard to recommend because it's barely a movie. It's an art piece. And that sentence right there will determine whether or not you want to see this, because it's a Dadaist theatrical performance and one that you're never quite sure actually does have any meaning. Like, sure, there's things that it is saying about sexual repression in the psychiatric industry, but it's hard to imagine that everything here has meaning, and it was just fun, artsy stuff. And it is fun. I love this one, and it's absolutely, completely insane. So there you have it, 10 movies that are pretty weird and strange and insane. And I picked 10 this time that I knew that I liked, 10 that I enjoyed thoroughly beforehand. And I would recommend all of these. I actually had a good time watching them all. Even the ones that I don't think were good were still pretty fun to watch. And let me know which of these you've seen, or let me know which one of these you would now like to see, or if any of these that you're like, no way ever in a million years. Tell me that down below in the comments. I want to hear it. And if you enjoyed this video, hit that like button. If you enjoyed the channel, subscribe. And if you think about it, go to my Patreon page at patreon.com/movietimelines. We'll sure appreciate that. And also, hey, what's the weirdest movie you've ever seen? Tell me that down below, and then I'll see you very shortly, because maybe we'll cover that on another list in the near future. And I'll see you soon. Thanks a lot, guys. Bye-bye.